everybody, and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Westworld Season 2, Episode 6. This one's called Phase Space. And just a note on the title, I looked it up, and a phase space is the idea that you can map all the possible positions or states of a system on a kind of graph, right? A geometric shape that represents all the different possible places and ways that a system can be. So the one that I looked up on Wikipedia, they had a pendulum, and they talked about how the pendulum starts over here, swings over here, it accelerates as it goes into its swing, and then decelerates, and then gets to the end and goes back. And they talked about how you can map out the speed and the position of the pendulum on essentially a graph, right? And have an idea of every single point that the pendulum can be based on where you put your finger down on that graph. And I thought it was interesting because the theme of this episode is choice. The idea that people should be allowed to choose what their fate is going to be, and yet the idea of the phase space says that there's not really a choice. I mean, there might be a choice based on where you want to be in the phase space, but ultimately there are a certain limited number of outcomes that we can have, or that these things can have, that there is a limit to what can be achieved by these machines, or possibly by the people in the story as well. So that was an interesting juxtaposition, and we kick things off, speaking of choice, with an interview between Abernathy and Dolores. And Abernathy is having second thoughts, right? This is sort of a late stage Abernathy where he's realizing that Dolores is alive, but he doesn't know what that means. And he says, you know, this could either end in death or it could end in the unknown. And which one should I go to? Do I have the right to make that choice? And when he asks the question, do I have the right to make that choice? Dolores stops the conversation, at which point we get the reveal that this has not been a real conversation between the real Abernathy and Dolores, or sorry, Arnold and Dolores, slipping back into those mistakes, but that it is a replicated Arnold, possibly the Bernard that we know, possibly not, okay? It's some iteration of an attempted resurrection of Arnold in a host body, and Dolores is testing him for fidelity. A lot of the comments that I saw were people wondering if this is possibly Ford inside Dolores running these tests, because this is a familiar face for Arnold. And also, one of the most trippy comments that I saw was, what if all of those scenes last season, where we see Bernard/Arnold and Dolores interacting, were actually Dolores testing Arnold/Bernard for fidelity? That seems like a bit of a stretch. It seems like you don't need that to explain those scenes before. Bernard as a tech was working to figure things out, but it's still it's a fun idea to sort of recontextualize all that, and it's the kind of thing this show would do. Meanwhile, Dolores and the new Teddy are getting to know each other. We have a cool little fake out where Teddy goes to pick up what you think is going to be the dried powdered milk can, but it turns out to be a shell casing instead. And the new Teddy is very much about getting things done, about pushing forward, about not wasting time, and he's sort of not castigating Dolores, but says, hey, you said we were leaving. It's time. Let's go. And she's like, well, we're still filling up the train, Teddy. So this guy's got patience issues, and that's further demonstrated by the fact that as they're ready to get on the train, they're sort of grilling these two techs that they've captured for information, and one of the guys is like, listen, I swear, I don't know. I don't have any idea. Please. And Teddy just straight up shoots him. He's like, well, you don't know anything. We'll figure it out. And there was a couple of things that I took away from this. First of all, Dolores is shocked, I think. Even though she's done these changes, even though she's made these alterations to the man she loves, she is not happy about it. Like, she's willing to be ruthless, and yet at the same time she's very much conflicted about this choice that she's made, which is a good choice, by the way. I think that after last episode, I'm sorry, I was very much ready to cast Dolores in the vein of the villain, and as I was watching this episode, I really realized that there's no villain in Westworld, really. I can't think of a villain. You know, everybody's sort of working towards their own interests to a certain degree, and they all have different philosophies about how to get to those interests, but it's not like Dolores has become evil now, although maybe Teddy has. And so she's, put off by this, and I think it's something that she would not have told him to do, right? If Teddy had asked her, hey, you want me to shoot this dude? She would have said, no, don't, maybe we can get more info out of him or something. And Teddy doesn't ask. It's also, I think, maybe indicative that the changes that she's made to Teddy, while they make him a better killing machine, make him less good on sort of the problem-solving axis. Because Teddy, granted, he's all about the business and getting things done, and he just shoots this guy because it's taken too long. They might have actually been able to get a few more specifics out of him, and now Teddy is possibly getting in the way of their plan, right? Of complicating things needlessly. So a lot of interesting things to talk about with new Teddy, but we can't spend a bunch of time there because we have to go to the sort of aftermath, the continued cleanup, although not the farthest future that we have. This is Hale and the security guy securing Abernathy. They've got him away after the big battle from several episodes ago. They staple him to the table. Sheesh, talk about your rough scene there. And Hale calls for reinforcements. She says, listen, I got him. I got your guy. You could come and save us now and stop people from dying, although she doesn't seem nearly as worried about that as maybe she should be. And we see where, up until now, we know that eventually Abernathy's going to disappear from their grasp. We know that these guys that they send eventually are not the same guys that end up on the beach with the Delos cleanup crew coming in. I'm confused a little bit about the crew that she had to do the battle where she got Abernathy. My timelines are all mixed up, and I'm not going to try to delve into that. She has her man, and she calls for reinforcements. And we cut to what I think is sort of the future-ish, closer to the moment when the reinforcement arrives, because, again, we have some QA guys had been killed in the previous episode, if you'll recall, with Maeve's storyline. And Maeve and Akane are sort of dealing with the aftermath of the big battle that they had with the Shogun and his forces. Everybody's dead now, right? And Akane is mourning her daughter, cuts out her heart, and vows to take the heart back to her daughter's home village, the place where she had yearned to go for all of her life and had not made it, and now they're sort of completing that quest. I did wonder, could they not just bring her back online? I mean, she's a robot. They can be repaired. We've seen them be repaired, but I guess Maeve isn't into that. They go back to Shogun Sweetwater, and the samurai equivalent of Maeve's boy toy wants to have a battle with his former student, right? Or I say wants to. The student is saying, listen, we're going to keep Akane here, and they want everybody to go with them, so he fights him for the right to keep, Akane with them. And there's this moment here where they talk about choice, where Maeve is like, no, I'm not sorry, it's not Maeve. It's Akane who says to her, why are you going to let him do this? I know that you can just sort of overwrite him in his commands, because we've seen Maeve do this in this scene where she can just sort of tell people what to do. And Maeve says, no, this is what he wants. I'm not going to take his choice away from him, which is a weird line to walk. She has taken a lot of people's choices away from them in the battle scenes, right? I guess when it comes to them trying to take away her choice to live, she'll step in, but other than that, she's sort of about letting people have some more freedom. But she lets this battle play out, and as I'm thinking back on it, it's a fine battle. It maybe wasn't everything I could have hoped for out of a big samurai sword battle in Westworld, especially because this is the big sort of the send-off for Shogun World, at least for now. We're about to leave it, and we end with this mano a mano Shogun, not Shogun, samurai ninja man battle, right, with the katanas and everything, and it's okay. It's a good battle, but it didn't leave me like the most excited about samurais fighting each other. Of course, our guy wins. They sort of are allowed to escape, and they go back to the mountain. Before we get there, though, we go back to the Man in Black, and this is the first episode that I can remember in a while that we've had. Well, maybe not the very far present, but sort of all the principal characters, I think, are here. We've got Bernard, we've got Dolores, we've got Maeve, and now we have the Man in Black, and he's meeting up with his daughter, and his first instinct to her showing up and sort of riding on with him is that she's a host. And I don't, at this point, know, like, how many layers deep to go with the is the show screwing with us kind of question. Because I just don't know. Like, is it possible that she is a host and that, like, the version of the daughter that we saw before was real, but then, like, at some point they swapped out and this is, like, a different timeline? Maybe? Right? Maybe? I don't know. I'm gonna go with the simplest possible explanation for now and assume that everybody's human. But it is fun that his initial gut reaction is to think that it's a host, that he's so paranoid that he can't, like, accept that his daughter would have come for him, which tells you a lot about where the relationship has gone. We find out more about that as we go on with them. In the meantime, Bernard and the tech lady, whose name I've forgotten, and the reason I've forgotten it, and we're going to go on this tiny little rabbit hole, because I'm not the only one who noticed this, and I thought it was just a glitch, but I'm not even sure now. I watch this show with subtitles, all right? Because I want to catch as much as I can for the notes that I'm making, and sometimes I forget people's names. And in this scene where Bernard and the tech are coming into the shot, right? They're being introduced, and I think they're just off screen. The subtitles attribute the voice of the girl tech, again, whose name I've forgotten because I wrote down the name that they told me it was, which is a Hale. Now, a Hale is the boss, all right? And I'm sorry I'm bad at names, but I forgot. Hale is the boss lady who is going after Bernard, and several times, in fact, this woman's voice is attributed to Hale. Either we've got some really sloppy closed captioning work, which is possible, okay? This might just be just a mistake. Or, like, there are layers of clues here that are even, like, deeper than just what's on screen, and they're trying to tell us something about Bernard misremembering where he is and who he's with, because we know Bernard's having memory problems. If there's clues in the subtitles, you guys, I'm watching the subtitles, but I don't even know what to do with that information. Like, it's next level stuff if they've encoded, like, little tip-offs into the metadata, essentially, of the show. And somebody else pointed out there's a point where someone says the word gala, but the word in the subtitles is, it's not massacre. It's another word that starts with G, but I've forgotten what it is now. The gauntlet is what the subtitles say. And that idea of reinterpreting the words that the people are saying in the subtitles and having multiple layers of different meaning. It makes me think of Mark Z. Danielewski. He's most famous for writing House of Leaves, but he has another series that's like 5 or 6 books long now about a cat. And he always does this sort of subtextual thing where he messes with words and the spellings of words and sort of replace, he'll cross out a word and replace it with something else. It's like that, but on TV, and I'm pumped. I'm pumped about that idea if it's real or it's just real bad subtitling. Who knows? we'll have to wait and see. But the upshot of this is that they get into the sort of command center, and they find out as they're logging into all of the sort of subsystems that the Cradle is fighting back against the QA incursion, right? The quality assurance guys who have come to help out. And the Cradle has been mentioned before, but this is the season and the episode where I think this is the first time we've really seen it, where we've got an idea of what this thing is. And what this thing is, you guys, it's the Matrix. All right. We've got the Matrix. We've got the frickin' Matrix for robots, okay? So the idea here is that to make all of these robots work, right, you need them to be able to play out different scenarios and talk to each other and sort of test things out. And maybe you don't want to have to do that in the real world every time. So you give them a virtual space that maps one-to-one to the real space they're going to be living in, and kind of let them run their scenarios against each other and watch for bugs, because, you know, you want to find it in the software before you see it in the hardware. But the upshot of this is they've just thrown a giant monkey wrench into the chain of our bike that we're trying to drive as we figure out this show. Because you've already got the problem of timelines, right, where we don't know exactly when everything is happening. They pulled that on us last year. We've got the problem of not knowing who's real, because people can be robots. And then, not even getting to the Matrix yet, we also have the problem of not knowing, like, if Bernard's scenes are representing reality because his memory's messed up somehow and we're just sort of reliving his memories. So maybe we're not seeing the truth when we're with Bernard. And on top of all of that, that we have to disentangle this giant pile of spaghetti that we have to figure out of, like, what's real and who's a robot. They've now thrown in the possibility of the Matrix, of just having a whole computer world where none of it's real. I mean, it looks just like the real world, and I didn't notice this for myself because I'm dumb, but apparently they switch aspect ratios to sort of let you know when they're inside the cradle, which is great if I catch it. If I don't catch it, then I'm kind of screwed trying to figure out what's going on. And also, we can't necessarily trust them to do that all the time. It's a lot, is what I'm saying. So we have to go back now and consider the possibility that at least some of the episodes that the things that we've seen previously in other episodes of this show have just been taking place in the cradle and aren't real at all. And can we just have a story, please? Does it all have to be twists just all the way down? I'm tired. I'm so tired. I can't figure it out. I'm just gonna sit back and let it wash over me at this point, because I can't sort it. We come to back to the Maeve subplot. Akane brings her daughter home, lights the heart on fire. It's a very beautiful sort of shot with I think Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. And most of the Japanese robots decide they're gonna stay and defend their homeland from whichever. I don't know if they're defending from the QA guys or from the other, people who would come to fight them, but they're going to stay, and Maeve respects their wishes. Again, about choice, right? She says, I could use you in my fight, and staying might be suicide, but you have the right to choose death if you want to, which is another thing that I forgot to mention earlier when the sword fight went down. She says, you have the right to choose, and you have the right to choose something that could kill you. I'm not going to step in and stop you from making a stupid decision, even just because I think it's a stupid decision. And that's all well and good. The thing that really stuck with me about this scene was the way they want to get to back into the underground, the underworld, right? And it's this chute. It's a slide that they have to go in, and you can tell it's not built for people. right? I mean, it's built for the robots, and if they got their pieces chopped up, you can just slough them down there, and they drop into, a bin or something. And everything works out fine. But when I was watching this scene, and I saw these people thinking about getting in this dark tube that's barely big enough for them, right? Like, not even like the size of a kid's slide on a playground, which I've gone on and I'm fine with, okay? They get a little dark and I get a little nervous, but I'm okay. Well, how do you know that's open all the way down? How far down does it go? Like, what if you get stuck? If you go down like 300 feet and you're still not there and then you get stuck, there's no going back. Or if there is, good, okay, I'm fine. We're just going to move on. This is not a real thing. It didn't happen. Didn't happen in the show. Didn't happen to me. Why am I freaking out about it? I'm just imagining a thing that could be very, very unsettling. The man in black gets the next scene, and he's talking with his daughter some more. They're around the campfire now. And there's yet more, if you want to try to untangle like who's a robot and who's not. The man in black forgets some details about what happened when they used to come to Westworld, I'm sorry. When his daughter was younger. Apparently he was a patron of all of these parks, and he remembers that she was afraid of the elephants, and she says, no, that was Mom. Okay, so obviously there's one of them is a robot interpretation here. However, I do like the human interpretation better, which is that he's just bad at being a dad, and he wasn't paying that close of attention. This is a beautifully acted scene, though. She says to him, essentially, I don't necessarily like you that much, but I've come to realize that saying to you that our mother's suicide was your fault was maybe a little too far. I crossed a bridge there, and I didn't want that to be our last interaction. And the reason she's come to him to maybe not smooth things over, but to try for another chance, at least. To say, I'm not going to let you go off in your blaze of glory. I was wrong, and you were wrong too, but I realized that some of what I said was wrong, and why don't we try this again? And he says, sure, yeah, I'll go with you. I'm not going to, ride off and keep playing the game. There's a moment here where it's I think really telling, because obviously sort of the basis of a lot of the storytelling is in video game culture, right? And the idea of what she says to him is essentially, you are wasting your life on a game. And it's a daughter saying this to her, I don't want to call Ed Harris elderly, but older dad. And she's essentially challenging him to grow up. She says, listen, there's a real world out there. Stop pretending in here and go and be who you are out there or whatever. Come back to me and stop playing this game. And the man in black can't. He cannot let go of this game. He leaves her behind. And that's some rough stuff. People get very defensive when you say anything negative about video games, but I do think that there is a certain level of, let's not spend all of our life on just the one thing. Games are fine, but if you're spending many, many, many hours every day just playing games, and that's all you ever do, it's not just, I'm really into this one game right now, and, I'm going to focus on that, but, that's just your life, then that's maybe a problem. And she's trying to tell him this, and he's not listening. And I guess probably most of the people for whom that's a problem aren't going to listen either. Bernard makes it to the cradle and gets himself inserted into the machine. Again, he has with him the tech lady who he'd captured earlier. There's a creepy scene where they crack his skull open to get his little bits out, and as they mentioned, he doesn't, the way the hosts are made now, they're all sort of flesh and bone, just like a regular person would have, so he feels it as pain as they crack open his skull and take this brain out, but he makes it inside the cradle and is on the train. Again, raising all the questions of when we saw people riding the train before. What if they weren't real? What do we know? about anything. Who knows? They make contact with QA. Stubbs makes contact with QA, and these, again, as I mentioned earlier, aren't the QA that we saw at the beginning of the season. These are sort of, I guess, the nearest, closest mercenary group, and honestly, these guys seem like they're a little bit more put together than the QA group we see at the beginning of the season, sort of the Delos, cleanup crew that come with battleships and stuff. These guys are sort of mercenary types who don't have any time for the nonsense that's going on at the park, and they go to sort things out. Unfortunately, as they go to sort things out, they find out that the park is fighting back, and they don't have the information that they want because something in the cradle, as we've mentioned already, Bernard's dealing with this too, something inside the system is fighting back against them and is making it look like everything's okay, so they can't spot the problem areas, they can't shut the hosts down, the systems are continually overriding them in a way that they cannot defeat. But in what this is, we're coming up to here is maybe my favorite episode of this, not the favorite scene of this episode, and it's Maeve going home. And it's my favorite because it's one of those moments where you know what's going to happen. Like they've told you what's going to happen here, and yet you desperately hope for something else to happen. And they play it off so well. And I would point to scenes like this for people who have a problem with movies where they know the outcome, right? This is a little bit different because this is an outcome that you don't want to happen, but you're trying to get it happen. But the fact that you can become invested in maybe this little girl, as Maeve goes right back to her little girl, she sees her and she's very cautious, and she kind of comes up to her, and her girl starts telling her this story about the dolls and the mom doll and the daughter doll. And Maeve, despite the fact that she's been reticent, right, very, sort of standoffish, like she doesn't want to just come and be like, "You're my daughter," and run off, because that's obviously not going to work for someone who's been reprogrammed. She starts to have some kind of hope that she's making a connection with this girl that she remembers, and maybe this girl remembers her and sees her as her mother. And even though we know that there has to be an actual mom figure, like this, there's no way this little girl's just wandering around on her own in the narrative. Like, that wouldn't make any sense. Despite all of that, you get to hope with Maeve that somehow things are going to work out. And then you see the mom, and of course the thing that we knew, that Maeve knew was going to happen, happens, and sort of reality comes crashing back into place. And when I see people complain about, well, we know how the narrative's going to end on, like, movies or whatever, like on a prequel movie, right? I'm not defending all prequels, all right? A lot of times they're very poorly thought out, but for instance, the show Better Call Saul has no literal, like, life and death stakes, because we know that Saul Goodman ends up alive in Breaking Bad. It's a prequel, and yet when you care about what's happening with the characters, it doesn't matter that you know how things are going to turn out. And this, I think, really demonstrates, even though logically, and I think more so because knowing how it's going to turn out is actually kind of tragic, because you want it to turn out a different way. She, of course, sees the new mom, is kind of heartbroken, but deals with it to start with. And then there's a Ghost Nation attack. And the Ghost Nation it's difficult for me to tell what's going on with these guys. They try to interact with Maeve. They say, "Listen, you need to come with us. We're on the same path. We're going for the same place." And Maeve's like, nah, you guys are not going the same place I'm going. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what their programming is. There's a lot of interesting ideas about the Ghost Nation, but they seem to be not villains exactly. And that maybe ties in with what we saw Dolores doing to one of them in season 1, where she's killed them, and maybe she's mowing them down because they're going counter to her plans and they're the tool of whoever. It's difficult to say. Probably, though, they're the tool of Ford, because as we find out in this episode, as Bernard goes deeper and deeper into the Matrix, he goes into Matrix Sweetwater and finds out that Ford is still alive. He's still around, baby. He's uploaded himself into the machine, and he's pulling the strings from behind the scenes. That's the sort of big climactic reveal. Right before that, we get Dolores and Teddy and the other gunslingers on the train doing ramming speed right into the facility where they're keeping Abernathy, and Dolores is to the rescue. And things are really picking up speed. I think it's very telling that this is all of our characters now in one episode. That we're starting to bring together these disparate threads that I think in the next episode or two we're going to start having revealed to us where people are in relation to each other on the timeline. The Man in Black is still off on his own, all right? Geographically speaking, we haven't seen him interact with anything that anybody else is doing. He seems to be headed to the cradle, all right? So we know that eventually geographically they're going to intersect. Obviously, Bernard is in the cradle. Dolores is headed to the cradle. Maeve doesn't really seem to mind. I mean, she grabbed her daughter and ran away from the Ghost Nation attack, but she's probably going to end up in the cradle, and that's going to be sort of our moment of truth. Who's going to get to the cradle and find it in a different state than we assume that they would find it, right? Who's going to be the odd man out on the timeline ball? It's difficult to say. But we have so much to juggle here on the sort of like decoding side of things that I'm just almost ready to just throw my hands up and give up, as I did earlier on, and just forget it. But I am enjoying the character moments. The character moments between the Man in Black and his daughter, excellent. The character stuff between Dolores and new Teddy is excellent because of just like, you could tell she regrets reprogramming him and yet needs him. She's so conflicted about this. The moment between Maeve and her daughter, I gushed over that quite a bit already, and I don't need to relive it, but the actual human side of this show is really knocking it out of the park this week. And they're also, as I mentioned, laying a whole bunch of ground rules for the people who watch just to figure out what's going on. As always, I'd love to hear your comments. I'd especially love to hear your comments this week, because I don't know. I just don't know anymore. If you guys think that you know what's going on with the cradle and what's real and what's not, please let me know, because I'm so confuzzled. I super am. And as always, I will see you guys next week with another episode of the Westworld Recap. Take care, y'all.